I'm okay. It was much more emotional than I thought, and I found it very hard to speak outside the court.
I was seeing a lot of her anyway in Barbados too, so that was great. The world has celebrated Elvis Presley as the uncontested king of rock and roll, whose voice, style, and presence shaped an entire generation. But behind the legend lies a far more complex story, one that only a few have dared to speak about openly, until now. Cliff Richard, the British pop sensation often labeled as the UK's answer to Elvis, has spent most of his career walking a fine line between admiration and silence when it comes to the American superstar. But after years of holding back, Cliff is finally ready to say what many insiders have only whispered behind closed doors. In a recent series of interviews and candid conversations, Cliff lifts the curtain on a side of Elvis the world never truly got to see. Not the polished performer, but the troubled man behind the myth. What Cliff reveals is not just about rivalry or influence. It's about choices, regrets, and uncomfortable truths that challenge everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley. Why did Cliff stay silent for so long, and what finally pushed him to break that silence? The answers may surprise you, and they just might change the way you see the king forever. Cliff Richard's Indian childhood, UK's first night at Rockstar, years of challenges, and legal battles. Cliff Richard's story begins in a place far removed from the glittering stages of London, or the electric buzz of rock and roll. Born on October 14, 1940, as Harry Roger Webb in Lucknow, British India, his early life was shaped by the final days of the British Empire. But it wouldn't take long for this boy, whose roots traced back to a faraway colony, to find his place as one of Britain's most beloved and enduring music icons. By 1958, he was no longer Harry Webb. He had adopted the name Cliff Richard, a name chosen to evoke both the edge of rock and roll, Cliff, and a nod to his idol, Little Richard. That same year, he released his debut single, Move It, which is widely considered the first authentic British rock and roll song. With its driving beat and rebellious energy, it shocked the British music scene and signaled the arrival of a new youth culture. At just 18 years old, Cliff Richard had launched himself into the spotlight and never looked back. Between 1959 and 1963, Cliff soared to superstardom, becoming the UK's top pop sensation. His smooth voice, clean-cut image, and catchy tunes captured the hearts of fans across the nation. Hits like Living Doll, The Young Ones, and Summer Holiday became instant classics, cementing his status not just as a pop singer, but as a cultural phenomenon. He also crossed over into film, starring in musical comedies that mirrored his musical success and broadened his appeal far beyond the record charts. Despite the seismic shift in the music industry in the late 1960s, particularly with the explosion of the Beatles and the rise of psychedelic rock, Cliff refused to fade away. Instead, he adapted. While many early rock stars vanished with changing tastes, Cliff transitioned smoothly into contemporary pop and gospel music. The 1970s saw him maintain steady popularity, even if the spotlight wasn't as bright as it once had been. His musical versatility and ability to remain relevant were becoming trademarks of his career. Then came 1976, a turning point. Cliff released Devil Woman, a track that marked a major comeback. The song wasn't just a hit in the UK, it also became a top 10 single in the United States, a market that had largely eluded him. Devil Woman was edgier and more mature, showing a new side of Cliff's artistry. It introduced him to a new generation of listeners and reasserted his place in the ever-changing music landscape. In the 2000s and 2010s, Cliff showed no signs of slowing down. He continued recording and touring, often collaborating with symphony orchestras to give new life to his classic hits. His ability to bridge generations, appealing to both lifelong fans and newer audiences, became a defining characteristic of his career in its later stages. Each performance, each new album, was a testament to his enduring love for music and his unshakable work ethic. But fame also has its burdens. In 2018, Cliff Richard found himself in a legal battle that shook him personally and professionally. The BBC had broadcast footage of a police raid on his home in connection with an unproven allegation. The case deeply affected Cliff, who had never been charged and maintained his innocence throughout. After a lengthy legal fight, he won a major victory against the BBC for invasion of privacy. The case not only restored his reputation, but also sparked national debate about media ethics and personal rights. It was one of the few times Cliff, who had always been known for his calm and gracious demeanor, publicly confronted the darker side of fame. Despite the emotional toll of that experience, Cliff pressed on. In the 2000s and 20s, he released an autobiography that gave fans an intimate look at his life, not just as an entertainer, but as a man of faith, resilience, and reflection. He continued to tour, performing in front of sold-out audiences who had supported him through every chapter of his life. His concerts were no longer just nostalgic events. They were celebrations of an artist who had outlasted trends, navigated trials, and stayed true to himself. Cliff Richard's false allegation, a televised raid, and a landmark lawsuit. The story of Sir Cliff Richard is one of longevity, faith and adaptability in the ever-changing world of music and fame. From his beginnings as Harry Roger Webb in British India, to his transformation into a British pop legend, Cliff's career has been marked by both resilience and reinvention. For more than 6 decades, he maintained a clean public image, sold millions of records, and navigated generational shifts in music. But even for someone as well-regarded and disciplined as Cliff Richard, fame came with its shadows, and in the 2000s and 10s, he would face the most challenging and painful controversy of his life. In 2014, Cliff Richard's world was turned upside down when South Yorkshire police raided his Berkshire home as part of an investigation into historical sexual abuse allegations. What made this incident especially shocking was not just the raid itself, but the way it was covered. The BBC, having been tipped off in advance, filmed the event live from a helicopter and broadcast it across national television. Cliff, who was abroad at the time, was never arrested or charged, but the images of police officers combing through his home were seen by millions. The impact on Cliff was immediate and severe. For someone who had built a reputation over decades as clean, moral, and private, being suddenly thrust into a criminal investigation on live television was devastating. He strongly denied the allegations from the outset, but the damage to his reputation and emotional well-being had already begun. Though no formal charges were ever filed, the broadcast painted a picture of guilt in the court of public opinion. It wasn't just an invasion of his home. It was, as he later described it, a violation of his humanity. In 2016, after a lengthy investigation, prosecutors announced that there was insufficient evidence to bring any charges against Cliff Richard. Despite this official statement of innocence, the public damage had already been done. And so, in a rare move for someone of his fame, Cliff chose to fight back, not through press conferences or retaliation in tabloids, but through the legal system. By 2018, Cliff Richard had taken the BBC to court, arguing that their decision to broadcast the police raid was a gross invasion of his privacy. The case gripped the nation, not just because of Cliff's high-profile status, but because it touched on a broader issue: how the media should report on individuals who are under investigation but not charged with a crime. The lawsuit became a landmark legal moment in the UK, one that forced journalists, broadcasters, and the general public to rethink the balance between press freedom and individual rights. Cliff ultimately won the case. The court ruled that the BBC had indeed violated his privacy and awarded him £10,000 in damages. Though some within the media industry voiced concerns that the verdict could have a chilling effect on investigative journalism, many others saw the decision as a crucial victory for personal dignity. For Cliff, the outcome was not about money. It was about clearing his name and reclaiming his right to be treated with fairness and respect. This chapter of Cliff's life revealed a side of him that many had never seen before. Not just the pop star or devout Christian, but the individual fighting for his basic rights in the face of institutional failure. Throughout the ordeal, he remained composed but deeply affected. He later described the period as one of the darkest in his life, calling the media coverage a trial by television. His case also inspired calls for legislative changes, including protections for suspects who have not been formally charged. Beyond the legal victory, Cliff was left to rebuild public trust. A difficult task, even for someone with his career record. Yet, he faced the process head-on. He gave interviews, wrote about his experience, and stood firm in his belief that no one, famous or not, should be subjected to such public shaming without due process. His fans, many of whom had supported him since the 1950s, stood by him, and the music industry at large acknowledged the bravery it took to pursue justice in the face of widespread scrutiny. But the BBC case wasn't Cliff Richard's only source of controversy. Over the years, his personal life has been the subject of persistent media speculation, often veiled in curiosity, and, at times, outright intrusion. His decision to never marry has prompted tabloid headlines for decades. Combined with his religious beliefs and reserved nature, Cliff's private choices have fueled rumors and assumptions, particularly about his sexuality. Despite never presenting himself as anything other than honest and respectful, he has been forced, time and again, to defend his right to privacy. Cliff has never shied away from speaking about this pressure. In interviews, he has acknowledged how deeply frustrating and hurtful it has been to have his personal life picked apart by those who know little about him. He has always maintained that his personal choices are his own, and that being a public figure does not eliminate the basic human need for privacy, dignity, and freedom from judgment. His relationship with the press has remained cautious, shaped by decades of experience. and a growing awareness of the impact media narratives can have, not just on public perception, but on personal well-being. Elvis Presley's Tupelo birth, global stardom, '68 comeback, and tragic death at Graceland. Elvis Presley's legacy stands as one of the most powerful and complicated in the history of music. Revered as the king of rock and roll, his influence on culture, sound, and stardom is undeniable. But behind the glamorous career was a life filled with ambition, contradiction, and, ultimately, deep personal struggles. After looking into Cliff Richard's legendary timeline, Elvis's story offers a sharply different, yet equally compelling, journey through fame, marked by both incredible highs and heartbreaking lows. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in the small town of Tupelo, Mississippi. His entry into the world came with an immediate note of tragedy. He was a twin, but his brother, Jesse Garon Presley, was stillborn. The loss reportedly left a lasting impression on his mother, Gladys, and shaped the intense emotional bond between Elvis and his parents, particularly his mother. Raised in a working-class family with modest means, Elvis grew up in a deeply religious environment, where gospel music played a central role in his early life. His upbringing in the American South also exposed him to the rich sounds of blues, country, and rhythm and blues, genres that would later define his unique musical style. In 1948, when Elvis was just 13, the Presley family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. The city, known for its vibrant music culture, became the setting for Elvis' transformation. It was in Memphis where his exposure to different musical influences deepened. He absorbed the spirit of Beale Street and the harmonies of Southern gospel quartets, all while developing his own voice and style, an unpredictable mix of spiritual soul and raw rock rhythm. In 1953, at the age of 18, Elvis walked into Sun Studio to record a demo as a gift for his mother. The studio's founder, Sam Phillips, was impressed by the young man's potential. A year later, in 1954, Elvis recorded That's All Right, a track that blended country and rhythm and blues in a way no mainstream artist had done before. The sound was fresh, rebellious, and impossible to ignore. With this song, Elvis had planted the seeds for what would soon be known as rock and roll. In 1957, at just 22 years old, Elvis purchased Graceland, a mansion in Memphis that would become his home and, eventually, a symbol of his legacy. Graceland reflected both his success and his Southern roots. It also offered him a place of retreat from the public eye, which would become increasingly important in the years to come. Between 1958 and 1960, Elvis put his rising career on hold to serve in the U.S. Army. He was stationed in Germany, where he experienced a very different world from the one he had known. It was during this time that he met Priscilla Beaulieu, a 14-year-old girl who would later become his wife. Though their meeting raised eyebrows due to their age difference, their relationship would become a significant chapter in Elvis's personal story. After returning from military service, Elvis shifted gears. From 1960 to 1969, he focused primarily on his film career, starring in over 30 movies. The films were commercially successful, but, critically, many were seen as formulaic and lacking in substance. His music during this period also became more commercial and less groundbreaking, leading some to believe that Elvis had lost touch with the rebellious spirit that had once defined him. While his fame remained intact, his cultural relevance began to decline. Then, in 1968, Elvis surprised everyone. In what is now known as the '68 Comeback Special, he returned to live performance in a televised concert that reignited his career. Wearing black leather and backed by a small band, Elvis delivered a raw, powerful performance that reminded the world of his extraordinary talent. The special wasn't just a musical success, it was a cultural reset. It proved that Elvis still had the charisma, voice, and energy that had made him a star. Following this comeback, Elvis began a new chapter in 1969 with a residency in Las Vegas at the newly opened International Hotel. The shows were elaborate and highly popular, attracting thousands of fans and cementing his presence as a live performer. While the Vegas years brought renewed attention, they also marked the beginning of a period of personal and physical decline. The demands of constant touring, the pressure to maintain his image, and the growing use of prescription medication all began to take a toll. In 1973, Elvis reached another peak with the Aloha from Hawaii via satellite concert. The event was broadcast to over 1 billion people worldwide, an unprecedented feat in entertainment history. It showcased his global appeal and reaffirmed his place as an international icon. But behind the scenes, his health was deteriorating. Though still performing, Elvis was increasingly dependent on prescription drugs and struggling with emotional issues, including the collapse of his marriage to Priscilla in 1973. Throughout the 1970s, Elvis continued to tour and perform, often to sold-out crowds. Yet his appearance, energy, and voice showed signs of strain. The once dynamic performer was now frequently fatigued, sometimes barely making it through shows. Friends and fans alike grew concerned as his physical condition worsened, but the machine of fame rolled on. Elvis remained a major draw, even as his personal life spiraled further out of control. On August 16, 1977, the world was stunned by the news of Elvis Presley's death. He died at Graceland at just 42 years old from a heart attack, with medical reports citing complications linked to prolonged prescription drug use. His sudden passing sent shockwaves around the globe, and for many, it marked the end of an era. The man who had redefined music and challenged cultural norms was gone, but his legacy was just beginning to take shape in the collective memory of generations. Elvis Presley's drug abuse, Priscilla controversy, and debate over cultural appropriation. Elvis Presley's life story, marked by groundbreaking success and innovation, also carries deep undercurrents of controversy, contradiction, and criticism. From his rise in the 1950s to his tragic death in 1977, Elvis was not only the face of a cultural revolution, but also the center of intense scrutiny. As we connect from the previous chapter in his timeline, a life that spanned humble beginnings, superstardom, and a highly publicized downfall, it becomes impossible to ignore the issues that surrounded him. These aren't just footnotes in his biography. They're essential to understanding the full picture of who Elvis Presley was, and how his legacy continues to be debated. In the 1970s, as Elvis' live performances continued, and his fame showed no signs of fading, his health was quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, spiraling downward. Behind the dazzling rhinestone jumpsuits and electrified stages was a man heavily dependent on prescription drugs. Elvis's use of barbiturates, amphetamines, and a range of sedatives had become severe. Former staff members and close friends would later describe a disturbing pattern. Doctors who willingly wrote prescriptions, an entourage that enabled the behavior, and a lack of intervention when it was most needed. The dependency affected not only his physical appearance, marked by weight gain and fatigue, but also his emotional state and reliability as a performer. Many of Elvis's final concerts, though attended by adoring fans, showed the toll his health had taken. He sometimes slurred his words, forgot lyrics, and performed with visible discomfort. This man, who had once redefined live entertainment, was battling inner demons and medical neglect. Despite growing concerns, the show continued, literally and figuratively. The people around Elvis, perhaps out of loyalty, fear, or financial interest, maintained the illusion of control, even as the situation worsened. This decline culminated in his death on August 16, 1977. Officially, the cause was a heart attack, but toxicology reports later revealed high levels of multiple prescription drugs in his system. The specifics of his death have been the subject of widespread speculation ever since. Some fans and conspiracy theorists have suggested that the true cause was covered up, while others believe Elvis faked his death to escape the crushing weight of fame. While these theories remain unsubstantiated, they speak to the mystique that surrounds Elvis and the unresolved nature of his final years. Adding to the complexity of his legacy is the controversy that existed even at the height of his fame. In the 1950s, Elvis was seen by many as a dangerous cultural force. His sexually suggestive dance moves and energetic performances were deemed inappropriate by conservative groups. In fact, some of his television appearances were famously censored, with cameras instructed to film him only from the waist up. For many parents and religious leaders, Elvis symbolized a moral decline, an artist who was corrupting youth and promoting a new kind of rebellion. Some Southern churches and conservative commentators went even further, accusing him of undermining Christian values and crossing racial boundaries that society at the time was not ready to accept. His embrace of black musical styles, rhythm and blues, gospel and soul challenged deeply rooted norms in a segregated America. While this made him a revolutionary to some, it made him deeply controversial to others. Elvis became not just a pop star, but a cultural flashpoint, attracting both passionate fans and vocal critics. Another aspect of his life that has drawn increasing scrutiny in recent decades is his relationship with Priscilla Beaulieu. When they first met, Elvis was 24, and Priscilla was just 14 years old. Though they later married when she was 21, the nature of their early relationship has raised serious questions about power dynamics, age appropriateness, and consent. In the context of the era, their relationship was often romanticized, but modern perspectives bring new questions. Priscilla has spoken about the isolation and expectations she faced as a teenager living in Elvis's world, one where control, image, and personal sacrifice were expected. Though she has expressed continued admiration for him as a performer and father, Priscilla has also acknowledged the pressures she faced in adapting to his lifestyle. Their relationship, like so much of Elvis's life, was layered with both affection and tension, loyalty and personal loss. The age gap and the circumstances of their early courtship remain topics of debate, with many questioning how such a relationship would be viewed and handled by today's standards. Perhaps one of the most complex and ongoing controversies surrounding Elvis Presley is the debate over cultural appropriation. While Elvis often credited black artists like B.B. King, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and Arthur Crudup as key influences, critics have argued that he disproportionately benefited from styles and genres rooted in African American culture. In an industry and era where black musicians often struggled to gain mainstream exposure, Elvis, as a white artist, was able to bring rock and roll into the mainstream and gain immense commercial success doing so. Cliff Richard breaks silence on Elvis Presley. Having explored Cliff Richard's brave stance during his own legal ordeal, we now turn to a remarkable twist. The pop legend is finally speaking out about his lifelong idol, Elvis Presley. After decades of admiration mixed with cautious distance, Cliff is breaking his silence, offering rare insights and revelations about the king of rock and roll. Cliff Richard's fascination with Elvis began in his teenage years. He vividly recalls that moment in May 1956 when he and friends first heard Heartbreak Hotel blaring from a parked Citroen in Hertfordshire. That voice, Cliff later said, sounded like he had secrets you needed to learn. It was a pivotal moment that changed the course of his life. That fascination quickly became obsession. Cliff has admitted in past interviews, "I didn't just want to be like Elvis. I wanted to be him. I'd like to have woken up and found that really he was me." Decades later, in a candid discussion, he laughed about his youthful daydreams. "I used to literally dream that I was Elvis. And then I'd wake up so disappointed because I wasn't." These weren't just passing thoughts. This unfiltered admiration shaped Cliff's early image. Dark, slicked back hair, swiveling hips, even mimicking Elvis's famous peanut butter and jam sandwich diet. It was earnest emulation rooted in deep respect and wonder. Yet over time, Cliff Richard stepped out from under Elvis's shadow. He carved out his own identity, especially as he embraced his Christian faith and developed a more polished, pop-centric sound. Still, the respect never faded. He once plainly stated, "Without Elvis Presley, there would be no Cliff Richard." That isn't just an acknowledgement. It's a foundational truth. On stage and in interviews, Cliff repeatedly declared, "If there had been no Elvis, there'd have been no Cliff Richard," eliciting knowing cheers from his fans. But over the years, Cliff began to see Elvis's life as a cautionary tale too. Reflecting on his own success and longevity, he credited his stable inner circle. He once explained, "Elvis was surrounded by people who wouldn't say boo to him. But Cliff has always been surrounded by friends who have a sense of reason." It's a stark contrast. While Elvis's entourage often enabled his excesses, Cliff's circle helped him avoid them. One particularly poignant story involves the only chance Cliff had to meet Elvis in the 1970s. He declined. Elvis wasn't in great shape at the time, and Cliff later admitted, "I thought, if I'm going to have me and Elvis on my refrigerator, I'd really like him to look great." Years later, Cliff confessed, "I regret it now. I was stupid." That small moment, filled with vanity and hesitation, now stands out in Cliff's memory as a missed opportunity. Not to meet a celebrity, but to connect with a personal hero who was struggling. In recent years, Cliff has taken a more open and reflective tone. He's no longer just the fan. He's the observer, the survivor, the peer. He has begun to speak with a kind of respectful clarity about the man behind the myth. He sounded like he had secrets to learn. Cliff said again, emphasizing that Elvis's voice carried more than musical brilliance. It carried pain, vulnerability, and mystery. Cliff's revelations are not cheap tabloid fodder. They come from someone who was once a teen, dreaming of Memphis, and who is now a man in his 80s, reflecting on the fragile nature of fame. He doesn't just celebrate Elvis, he humanizes him. And in doing so, he finally tells the truth as he sees it. What Cliff exposes isn't scandalous. It's sobering. Elvis's genius was matched only by his fragility. He was surrounded by love, but also by silence. He was adored, but isolated. He had the voice of a generation, but no one close enough to truly help him when he needed it most. Cliff sees the clear divide. Elvis died at 42, consumed by prescription drugs and emotional exhaustion. Cliff, on the other hand, endured public challenges, media speculation, and even a devastating false allegation. Yet, he survived and continued. The difference, Cliff says, is support. Cliff has always had good advice down the line, and good people around him, he noted. That support, he implies, is what kept him from going the same route as his idol.